My dad told my grandma, "At the airport, I forgot your ticket. Just go home." They had planned this. I stayed with her. 3 weeks later, my parents returned and went pale when they saw who was standing next to me. My grandmother's boarding pass folder was empty. She opened it at gate 14B of Charlotte Douglas International at 5:47 a.m., with 11 family members standing around her in the particular restless cluster of people who have been awake since 3 in the morning and are ready to be somewhere else. She'd been clutching the folder since my Aunt Diane had handed it to her in the car, telling her it had everything she needed inside. I watched Grandma Hazel open the clasp. I watched her face do the specific, careful thing it does when she has received information she is still processing. I watched her hands turn the folder over, look inside the back pocket, open it again. A printed itinerary. No ticket, no confirmation number, no boarding pass. A piece of paper that had the shape of a travel document without any of the substance. She closed the folder. She didn't cry. My grandmother has not cried in public in the 31 years I have known her, a fact I have always attributed to 34 years of teaching 3rd grade in a school where crying in front of the children was simply not an option she permitted herself, a professional habit so deeply ingrained that it had apparently become a personal one. She just closed the folder and stood with it in both hands, looking at the departure board. My father stepped forward. He had the expression of a man performing surprise while already knowing what the outcome of the performance would be. "Mom, I think there might have been a mix-up with your ticket. The flights are full. There's nothing I can do at this point." My Aunt Diane shook her head. "It's too bad. She can just take a cab home." My stepmom Brenda turned away and said to no one in particular, but loudly enough for me to hear, "She wouldn't enjoy Europe anyway. She can barely walk." Grandma Hazel set down her rolling suitcase. She looked at the folder in her hands. She looked at the departure board, and I understood, watching her face, that she already knew. Not the details, not yet, but the shape of what had happened. The way you know the shape of a thing before you can name it. I reached into my carry-on and pulled out my boarding pass. I tore it in half. "I'm going home with Grandma," I said. Nobody turned around. "My name is Jordan Farrell. I am 26 years old, a paralegal at a civil litigation firm in Charlotte, and my grandmother Hazel is the reason I went into law, though she would say that's too much credit to give one retired 3rd grade teacher. She is 73, 5'1", with the posture of someone who has spent 3 decades telling children to sit up straight and has applied the same standard to herself consistently for 40 years. She makes fig preserves in September from a tree in her backyard that is older than my father. She keeps a Bible on her nightstand and a crossword dictionary on the kitchen table, and she has never, in my memory, bought anything for herself without first buying something for someone else. She is the person who showed up at every school event, every graduation, every difficult moment with food and without expectation. She paid for the Europe trip, all of it. $30,000 from her savings for 11 family members. Flights, a river cruise, hotels in Paris and Rome and Barcelona. She had been planning it for 2 years. She had shown me the brochure 14 months ago at her kitchen table, over coffee, the real kind, the kind she makes in a percolator she's had since before I was born, with the specific, contained excitement of a woman who doesn't allow herself to want things often and has decided, finally, that this is something she wants. 73 isn't old, she'd said. My mother was still gardening at 81. I had agreed that 73 wasn't old and that the river cruise looked beautiful and that Paris in the spring was supposed to be extraordinary, and I had told her so because it was true and because she deserved to hear it. What I had not known then, and would not know for another 2 weeks, was that the money for this trip had not come from the account she believed she was drawing from. It had come from an account my father had been drawing from for 5 years. My grandmother did not know her own balance. The early signs had been there for years. I want to be honest about that, about the things I had noticed and explained away, because explaining away is what you do when the alternative requires a conversation you're not sure you're entitled to have. The thermostat set to 62 in October, which I'd attributed to her lifelong frugality. The store-brand medication in the cabinet for a woman who had earned a pension and Social Security and should have been comfortable. The gutters on her house, which she owned free and clear, that had been sagging for 3 years. And when I'd mentioned them to my father, he'd said he was handling it, and the topic had closed. My father's line, consistent for as long as I could remember: "Mom's fine. She just doesn't like spending money." He said it the way you say something you've rehearsed. Not defensively, which would have been a signal. Just easily, the way a person says something they've decided is the complete truth and sees no reason to discuss further. He was lying. He had been lying for a long time. I just hadn't done the arithmetic. We drove home from the airport in silence, which was not unusual for us. Grandma Hazel and I have always been comfortable in silences together. She looked out the window at the highway. The sun was coming up, that early rose light of 6 a.m. In October, that makes everything look temporarily gentler than it is. Halfway home, she said, "I think your father has been taking money from my account." I kept my hands on the wheel. "Tell me everything you've noticed," she told me, slowly. The way someone talks when they've been assembling something in their head for a long time and are finally saying it out loud and are slightly afraid that saying it will make it more real. The bills had seemed low. The amounts she'd paid for things didn't seem to add up to what she thought she had. When she'd mentioned wanting new kitchen curtains, my father had told her there wasn't much in the account right now, and maybe they should wait. He'd been picking up her mail, he said, to save her the walk to the box in bad weather, and the statements were filed at his house for safekeeping, and there was really no reason for her to worry about the numbers because he was handling everything. She'd believed him. She'd believed him because she trusted him, and because trusting your child isn't naivety, it's what you're supposed to be able to do. "The paper I signed," she said, 5 years ago. He said it was for emergencies. In case something happened to me and I couldn't manage things myself. I knew what a financial power of attorney was. I had been a paralegal paralegal for 4 years. I understood in the car on that October morning exactly what a broad financial power of attorney executed over 5 years with no oversight could produce. I did not say this to her. I drove home. That night, I lay awake in her guest room and ran the arithmetic, the thermostat at 62, the generic medications, the gutters. My father's easy, repeated assurance that she was fine. She just didn't like spending money, the closed topics, the mail at his house, the statements she'd never seen. I got up at midnight and wrote a list. Then I went back to bed and made a plan. The first thing I did in the morning was check her mail stash. She kept a basket by the back door where she put things she was going to deal with later. Circulars, charity solicitations, a utility bill, no bank statements, not one. Nothing from any financial institution. For a woman with what should have been significant savings, there was not one piece of mail from a bank. I called her bank at 9 a.m. "I'm calling on behalf of my grandmother, Hazel Farrell, to inquire about her account," I said, in the measured voice I use for anything legal. "I'm sorry, we can't release account information to an unauthorized party. The sole authorized party on this account is Richard Farrell, my father." I drove her to the branch myself. Patricia Carver, the branch manager, 20 years with the institution, listened to what we explained with the attentive patience of a professional who has been trained to recognize certain patterns in certain types of family visits and who is taking this one seriously. She pulled up the account. She turned the monitor so my grandmother could see the screen. 5 years ago, $212,000. Today, $41,600. Grandma Hazel looked at those two numbers for a long moment. She didn't gasp. She didn't say anything. She just looked at them with the same expression she'd worn at the airport with the empty folder. The expression of a woman absorbing information she is not going to cry about. Patricia printed the full transaction history. 11 pages. Every withdrawal for 5 years. Each one authorized under the power of attorney. Each one signed with my father's name. Home repairs, medical reimbursements, household expenses, loans, transfers. Some amounts were small, some were not. The cruise upgrade and Paris hotel that my father had booked. Not for his mother, who was sitting across from Patricia Carver in a bank branch while her family sent gelato photos from Venice. Charged to this account. $27,800. $170,400. Over 5 years. Gone to one name. My grandmother took the printout and folded it in quarters. Precisely. The fold of a woman who has received information and is putting it somewhere until she knows what to do with it. "Help me fix this, baby," she said. To me, not to Patricia Carver. To me, not revenge, not punishment. Fix it. Get back what is hers and make sure it stays hers. "Yes, ma'am," I said. "Give me a few days." Marcus Webb had been practicing elder law in Charlotte for 19 years. His office was on the 4th floor of a building on South Tryon, with a waiting room that was organized and quiet and populated. On the afternoon I brought my grandmother in, by 2 other elderly people sitting with what appeared to be their adult children. I had looked him up before I called. His record of successful financial exploitation cases was public information. 6 civil recoveries, 3 criminal referrals that had resulted in conviction, 1 that was ongoing. He did not lose often. He listened to our account with a yellow legal pad and a pen he had not yet uncapped, which I later understood was because he was listening before he was writing, not skipping anything. When we finished, he uncapped the pen. "What documentation do you have?" I laid out what I'd brought, the bank printout from Patricia Carver, 11 pages. The power of attorney document, which my grandmother had found in a folder of her own papers the previous evening. The one she hadn't thought to look at in 5 years because she'd trusted the person who'd handed it to her to be using it for the purpose he'd described. A written statement from her neighbor, Eleanor Goss, who had observed my father's visits over the years and had specific dated memories of conversations about the mail and the bank accounts and the repairs that she'd seen scheduled but never seen completed. Marcus read everything in sequence, without comment. "The power of attorney is broad," he said. "Full financial authority, executed appropriately at the time. The question is whether the use of that authority constituted a breach of fiduciary duty under North Carolina elder law." He looked at the bank printout. "The pattern here is suggestive. The question is documentation. There's one more thing," I said. I had found the email 2 nights before, on the laptop my grandmother kept in her kitchen, the one my father had set up for her 4 years ago and had logged into with his own credentials, apparently to manage her email account as part of the arrangement he'd constructed around managing her affairs. She had no password of her own. She used it to read the news and watch YouTube videos of piano music. The inbox was his. I had printed the email on her home printer because I believed in having physical copies of things. My father had sent it to my Aunt Diane 3 months before the trip. "Don't book Mom's ticket. Tell her we'll handle it. She won't even notice the money's gone. The cruise upgrade and the Paris hotel I booked for us runs about $28K. It's coming out of her account, but she'll never see the statements." Marcus read it twice. "On a computer she owns," he said, almost to himself. Then, logged in with credentials he set up and controls. He put the email on top of the stack and capped his pen. "He didn't forget the ticket," he said. "He planned to leave her at that gate." "Yes," I said. "And the family trip, the upgrades, the hotel, charged to her account." "Yes." He looked at my grandmother. "Mrs. Farrell, I'd like to file a petition to revoke the power of attorney, freeze the accounts, and pursue civil recovery of the withdrawn funds. I'd also like to refer the documentation to the district attorney's office for a review of criminal financial exploitation charges under North Carolina General Statute 14-112-2. Grandma Hazel looked at him for a moment. "Can you get my money back?" "Some of it," he said honestly. "Possibly most, depending on where it went and what we can trace. Not all, if it's been spent." He paused. "But I can stop it from happening again. Guaranteed." "Then let's do that," she said. The 3 weeks my family spent in Europe were the most productive 3 weeks of my professional adjacent life. I provided everything Marcus needed in the first 5 days. Quick pause. If you want more stories like this in better quality, my Spotify's linked in the description. The bank records, the email, the power of attorney, Eleanor Goss's sworn statement, an additional sworn statement from Patricia Carver at the bank regarding the account history, and the single authorized party. Marcus filed the petition to revoke the power of attorney in Superior Court on day 6. A judge granted an emergency freeze on the accounts connected to the power of attorney on day 8, pending a full hearing. On day 9, my father's card declined in Venice. He had been using an account connected to the power of attorney to fund the trip, the same account the court had just frozen. The freeze applied retroactively to any accounts under the power of attorney's authority, which included, as it turned out, a joint account he'd opened in his name and my grandmother's name without her knowledge, into which he'd been depositing her funds before spending them. He called her cell phone first. No answer. I had suggested she let it go to voicemail, and she had agreed with the easy compliance of someone who has decided to trust a person's judgment and is following through. He called twice more that day, then called my number, which I let ring. He flew home 4 days early, alone. My Aunt Diane and my stepmom Brenda stayed. Their portion of the trip had been, as far as I could tell from the charges Marcus had traced, funded entirely from my grandmother's account, but that was a matter for the legal process rather than me. I knew he was on his way back. I set 6 chairs around Grandma Hazel's dining table, his chair, Diane's chair. She would be back in 2 days, and there would be a second conversation, but I wanted the table set. Brenda's chair, my grandmother's chair, at the head, because it was her house and her table. Marcus Webb's chair, my chair. I put a water pitcher in the center of the table. I thought about doing something more elaborate, coffee maybe, and decided the table was enough. Grandma Hazel made pound cake. I didn't ask her to. She simply made it, because making pound cake is what she does when she is anticipating a difficult thing and needs something to do with her hands, and she set it on the sideboard with a knife beside it and did not cut it until everyone was sitting down. My father came through the front door at 3:14 p.m. on a Tuesday with his suitcase and the particular expression of a man who has spent a transatlantic flight in economy class, because his upgrade had been funded from a frozen account and he'd had to take what he could get, deciding how he wanted to present himself. He was tan from the trip. He'd been to the Trevi Fountain 3 days ago. His mother's money had bought him a view of it. He stopped when he saw Marcus. He didn't know Marcus by sight, but he knew what the presence of a suited man with a legal binder at his mother's dining table meant, because my father is not a stupid man. He is in many ways a careful one, and he understood the room before Marcus opened his mouth. "Sit down, Dad," I said. He sat. He sat at the chair I had placed for him, which was not at the head, that was Grandma Hazel's, and not at the foot, which was Marcus's. He sat at the side, in the chair of a person who is present but is not in charge of the table. Marcus opened the binder. He read the withdrawals aloud, all of them in chronological order, with dates and amounts and the memo fields where they existed. He did this in the same steady, uninflected voice he used for everything, the voice of a man who understands that information delivered calmly is more devastating than information delivered with heat because it has nowhere to hide. He read for 22 minutes. Home repairs from 3 years ago, $14,200. Invoice from contractor Brenda's brother-in-law that Marcus had verified with the county permits office. No permit ever pulled for the described work. Medical reimbursements from 2 years ago, $8,600. Marcus had obtained the insurance explanation of benefits from my grandmother's insurer. Insurance had covered the full costs. My father had charged them to the account anyway. A $25,000 transfer 18 months ago to an account in Diane's name, labeled loan, no promissory note, no record of repayment, no disclosure. The River Cruise upgrade and Paris hotel charged 5 weeks ago, $27,800. And then the email. Marcus read it in the same voice he'd read everything else. "She won't even notice the money's gone." Brenda's hand went to her mouth. She'd come back early. She'd landed that morning and she'd received a text from me that said, "You should be at this." She was here. She was sitting with her hand over her mouth, which I didn't fully understand yet, but which I would later, after she called me privately, come to understand as the expression of a woman who had known things she'd told herself she didn't need to do anything about, and who was sitting in the room where she was finally required to sit with that. Diane stared at the table. My father's face, over the 22 minutes, had gone from tan to a color I would describe as the specific off-white of old newspaper. He had not moved. He had not spoken. He sat with both hands flat on the table, in the posture of a man who has calculated that motion would be worse than stillness, and has chosen stillness. "That's illegal," he said when Marcus finished. His voice came out smaller than he'd intended. "You went through my email on a computer your mother owns," Marcus said. "Logged in under credentials you set up and control. The email is admissible. The access was your own arrangement." He adjusted the binder on the table. "The petition to revoke the power of attorney was granted 10 days ago. The accounts have been frozen pending the outcome of the civil recovery proceedings. I've referred the matter to the district attorney's office, who have opened an inquiry under North Carolina statute 14-112.2, financial exploitation of an elder." My father turned to me. His voice when it came had the specific register of a man who is trying to reframe the entire situation as my fault, and who believes he can still make that argument work. "You turned her against me." Grandma Hazel spoke for the first time since he'd sat down. She had been sitting at the head of her own table, in her own house, in the chair that had always been hers, with her hands folded in front of her. She had not interrupted anything. She had listened to 22 minutes of her own savings being read back to her in the voice of a stranger, and she had not moved. When she spoke, it was in the voice she used for 34 years on third graders who had done something she was not going to shout about. Steady, completely level. The voice of a woman who is not angry because anger would imply uncertainty, and she is not uncertain about a single thing she is about to say. "I saved that money for 22 years, she said. One paycheck at a time. 22 years of not going on trips, of not replacing what could be fixed, of trusting that the work I did for 3 decades was building something that would take care of of me. She looked at my father directly. I signed that paper because you're my son, and a mother shouldn't have to check behind her own child. A pause, small and deliberate. But a son shouldn't make his mother need to. She looked at him for a long moment. You didn't forget my ticket, she said. You just thought I wouldn't matter enough for anyone to stay. I felt that sentence in the specific place you feel things when someone has said the exact accurate truth about a situation that you've been circling without being able to name it. She had named it. Not his greed, though that was there. Not the money, though that was there too. The thing underneath all of it. He had believed that no one would choose her, that she was so accustomed to being the last consideration that she wouldn't even register as someone worth staying behind for. She reached into the folder in front of her. I had placed it there before anyone arrived, and slid a single additional document across the table. Marcus had found it during the discovery phase. A life insurance policy, my grandmother's, with a beneficiary change dated 18 months ago, changing the primary beneficiary from a charitable organization she'd named 20 years ago to Richard Farrell, without her signature, without her knowledge, my father's name on the line, in handwriting that was not hers. My father looked at the document. He looked at his own name. He understood, reading it, what it meant for the legal situation, what it added to the record Marcus had already compiled, and what it signaled about the full scope of what he'd been building. He looked up. Mom, he said. His voice had changed entirely. The calculation was gone from it. Something older had replaced it. This isn't over. My grandmother did not blink. No, she said. It's just getting started. The civil recovery case is ongoing, and I am not able to comment on its specifics, because I am not a party to it, and Marcus has very specific things to say about what I am allowed to discuss publicly. What I can tell you without restriction, the power of attorney is revoked. The accounts are unfrozen in my grandmother's sole name. New account numbers, new passwords, no authorized parties except herself and Marcus's firm in a limited capacity for legal matters. The mail goes to a post office box that only she has the key to, because that was her idea, and I thought it was an excellent one. Patricia Carver at the bank sent a letter to Marcus's office after the hearing. Marcus forwarded it to me. It said, in the precise language of a bank's official correspondence, that the institution had reviewed the account history and had identified certain withdrawal patterns consistent with financial exploitation protocols, and that a referral had been made to the appropriate regulatory and law enforcement bodies. It said it in 4 sentences. It meant several significant things. My Aunt Diane retained her own attorney, which is relevant and which she should have done faster. Brenda called me 6 weeks after the dining room meeting, and we had a conversation I will keep private because she asked me to, and because honoring that request cost me nothing, and what she said in that conversation is between the two of us. Grandma Hazel has a new thermostatic control, set to 68, because she told me she didn't need it warmer than that, and I told her that I'd pay the difference if she did, and she told me she didn't need my money. The gutters were replaced by a contractor Marcus recommended, licensed and bonded, paid from an account with only her name on it. She watched the work from a lawn chair in the backyard and told me afterward that the crew had done it right.